Hey everybody, Ian from IanArthurs.com here with another video lesson for you. As usual, please make sure to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell. Today's lesson is all about vibrato. This is a technique lesson where we're going to go over how to do a vibrato and just talk about the importance of it in general. So first off, what is vibrato? Vibrato is essentially just shaking the note back and forth here. So I'm going to push the string up or pull it down to achieve that up and down pitch sound that you're hearing. So instead of hearing just a stagnant, steady note, you hear it barely going up and down. Now, if you go too far, it's going to sound out of tune, and then that's essentially what we call a bend. So vibrato, you want to do just a very small motion, and there's a couple different ways you can do that. So vibrato, you have what is kind of considered, I think, the proper way of doing it, which would be pulling down. So what I mean by that is your motion is going to start pulling downwards towards the bottom of the fretboard. And then there's also maybe the less popular pushing up, which I personally like to do both, and I think you need to be able to do both, because if you're on the high E string, for instance, and you try to vibrato going down, you're going to pull it right off the guitar. And the opposite is also true. If you're on the low E and you try to push up, you're going to push that string right off the guitar again. So at worst, for you to be able to do vibrato well and competently, you need to be able to push up and pull down. So we're going to kind of talk about that today and how that works. So first off, the main point of motion really comes from the wrist. It's not in the fingers. It seems like it's in the fingers because your finger is, moving back and forth with the string underneath it. But it's not. It's really the wrist is the main point of motion. And what I mean by that, if you look at my finger here, my finger isn't moving back and forth and like pushing and pulling. It's my wrist here. I'm actually going to pull my whole wrist back and forth a little bit. My thumb is going to stay on the back of the guitar here, on the back of the fretboard, so I don't lose my anchor, because if I lose my anchor, I'm going to be a little out of control, and it's harder to keep and maintain a good position. So my thumb will stay on the back of the fretboard, and I'll pull down with my wrist, and whenever I'm pulling down, I'm not also pushing back up. So when you pull down, you don't also push. That would sound like this, where you're not reverting back to the original note. Now, I like to compare that to like driving a car, where when you're driving a car and you make a turn, you don't actually have to then force the steering wheel back into center straight position. It kind of does it on its own, and your hands should just be on the wheel to guide it. But that's kind of the same as this here. You don't have to push the string back into position. You need to basically pull the string down and then go back into your normal position. Just kind of let the string guide you while you're on it. And then just do it regularly, frequently, in a short period of time, essentially. You need to do it very evenly too. Rhythmically, that's really important. You don't want to have really sporadic vibrato where you're hearing it kind of frantic or too fast. I'm not a big fan personally of going, really fast. That makes me kind of, that seasick feeling, right? Certain types of music, you can get away with different things like that a little bit more. But in general, what my preference is more on the blues and rock and jazz side of things, where a little bit of a slower vibrato I think is nice. I think a thicker, slower vibrato sounds great. But it does depend. This is up to you to decide. And I really do think you can tell the identity of a player based on their vibrato. That's a huge part of their tone. So when it comes down to it for you, you need to decide how you want to do it. Another thing is this is also a feel thing, which anytime you're dealing with something that's a feel thing, it's really hard. I can tell you all day long the basics of the mechanics here of how you should move your hand, But that doesn't mean that you're suddenly going to be able to do it, because you need to experience it for yourself. It's a feel thing. You have to feel it. So, how you do it and what's natural for you, you can play around with it and try to experiment a little bit, and you'll eventually find it, but it might take a little bit. So where you want to use a vibrato would be any long notes or any notes ending a phrase, which hopefully should also potentially be a long note. Doesn't have to be, but it's a good opportunity for it. So if you're doing a lick, you can hear at the end of that lick that I'm doing a nice long vibrato. Same thing. But you can also do it in the middle of phrases too. And anytime you have an opportunity where you have a longer note, you should, in my opinion, do a vibrato. If you don't, it just sounds kind of sterile to me. It's very plain and oftentimes a little bit boring. So adding vibrato into any lick you play is going to make it infinitely more interesting and give it character. And once again, hopefully should be able to give people the idea of who you are as a player. That should become a big part of your identity. So when you're playing, they should be able to hopefully tell who you are based on hearing that. Now, personally, I like to push up a lot of the time. I don't know why. That's just always what felt more natural for me. But a lot of people, from my experience of teaching over the years, most people prefer the opposite, where they like to pull down as their primary and then only push up, for instance, on the high E string because they have to. Whereas I'm more the reverse. I probably push up more frequently and then pull down for my vibrato, mostly just on the low E. But quite frankly, I do it both ways and don't think that much about it either way. So I might be surprised at my split not being as lopsided as I think it is. One last detail here for technique, you want to mute around that note. So if you're doing your vibrato and you're noticing that maybe you're hitting other strings there, you can mute with your right hand and get rid of those. Even if you're hitting it with your left hand, your right hand can barely touch that string and get rid of that sound. You can't really see it probably, but my right hand, the base of my thumb right here is just barely touching the A string. So by doing that, I'm never going to hear that A string coming out where I don't want it to. And then my second finger is touching the G string. I've got my fingertip, my nail there on the G string, so that's never going to come out either. You won't hear that. So the only thing you're going to hear is that D string. Now, that's a more advanced technique to do muting like that. That's really hard. But I do think it's, an eventual goal whenever you're doing vibrato and bending and all that kind of stuff. You want to figure out how to get your right hand involved and mute some other strings. Your left hand can also be involved with that, but it's a little bit harder to do the muting at the same time as some of those techniques. So that's the main gist of vibrato, my take on it. I really hope it helps you out, but let me know what you think in the comments below. I'll see you in the next one.